In today's lesson, we'll be learning about nonviolent resistance and more specifically Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which discusses his use of nonviolent resistance in Birmingham to combat unequal rights and to fight for the civil rights of African Americans. Also, we'll be touching base on Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience as well as Plato's The Apology. Start off, Martin Luther King was widely respected and renowned for his use of nonviolent resistance, or what he called in direct action in an attempt to end segregation in the southern U.S. states and promote equality in the eventual gain of equal rights for African Americans in the U.S. King faced hatred and brutality, and he stood staunchly against it with forms of civil disobedience such as marches, boycotts, sit-ins, and freedom rides that demanded that U.S. citizens not only acknowledge the unfair treatment that African Americans were receiving, but that moved them to change and end this unfair treatment. Just as Henry David Thoreau argued that people have an obligation to do what is morally right, even if it means disobeying the law, King believed that people had a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws that create an inferiority between one human being and another. King's conviction and belief that nonviolent direct action was the only way to procure justice from an unjust opponent was deeply rooted in the same philosophy that led Socrates to believe it was necessary to remain in prison when facing execution, which is that to respond to an evil with another evil is unjust. The great philosophical link between King, Thoreau, and Socrates is the fundamental belief that the individual is more important than the majority, or rather that the individual has a responsibility to act in a manner that they believe to be morally just, even if that contradicts with the beliefs and actions of the majority. Ultimately, King believed that nonviolent resistance was the only way to stake a legitimate claim for the procurement of civil rights for African Americans, because acting violently would only undermine the credibility of their cause, and more importantly, the only way to gain justice from an unjust opponent was to act justly. One of King's greatest arguments in favor of the civil rights movement, and more specifically the civil disobedient actions in Birmingham, was that the movement was rooted in the American tradition of fighting for God-given rights of freedom, and even more American, the fight for constitutional rights that the Founding Fathers had created. Slightly less than 200 years after the Founding Fathers proclaimed that all men were created equally, King and his followers were still fighting for that statement, all men, to include African Americans as well. King realized that in order to